the easy stuff is going to get replaced by robots. So if that's all you're good at, you're done. Furthermore, if you're a great coach, are you now working to get the transformation that takes you an hour into 25 minutes? So are you working to speed up your ability to get the results a client needs? So time to result is a huge metric to be paying attention to. And if you aren't challenging yourself to, okay, how could I have done this coaching session in 7 minutes? You aren't pushing hard enough.
Welcome to the Coaching Studio. I'm Lyssa, deHart, your host, and I am honored to welcome David Goldsmith, MCC, to the show. David is a true pioneer in the executive coaching profession with over 30 years of transformative impact. An inaugural member of the Coaches 50, he has guided hundreds of executives and entrepreneurs to achieve remarkable results with his incisive and highly effective approach. David's influence on the coaching world is unparalleled. As a co-founder of the Foundation of Coaching, now the Institute of Coaching at Harvard Medical School, and the International Coaching Federation, ICF, he has helped shape the global coaching profession. He served as the first president of Coach U and introduced professional coaching to Japan, teaching its first generation of coaches. As the founder of 7 Paths Forward and the Accelerated Coaching Excellence Program, David has helped over 3,000 coaches up their game from good to great. He also partners with senior leaders at top organizations such as Google, Meta, and the Boston Consulting Group, bringing clarity, insight, and transformation to their leadership journeys. Beyond coaching, David is a person who finds joy in collecting art, crafting bread, and he's even upping his game to French pastries. Maybe we'll get into that. Making cheese and savoring excellent espresso, an inspiring mix of creativity and mastery that mirrors his approach to coaching. David, welcome to the show. I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. It's so fun because you and I talked last year, and I'm just really looking forward to spending this time with you.
I've been looking forward to the conversation as well. I can't wait to see where we go.
I am excited. Well, let's begin then with, everybody's got a bit of a journey, and I'm really curious, what has led you to this place in your life right now that you find yourself?
I was gifted with 2 unique gifts over 35 years ago. My dad was dying from an untreatable form of lung cancer. I was visiting with him about halfway through, and freed up my mom to go do some errands. And while she was gone, he was complaining that she wasn't doing enough to take care of him. Now, we know that's silly, but when people are dying, they lose some perspective. I chatted with him that day about what was actually going on, but I somehow did it in a way that I think we now come to know is helping people understand perspective and being able to see things from a different lens. The short of it is, at the end of the conversation, he said, I don't know what you just did, but that was the most extraordinary conversation we ever had. It's great that you're an entrepreneur, great you're building businesses, go do that. Now, my dad was never one to give me advice, never one to tell me what to do, never tried to influence me in any way. So that was remarkable to hear that from him. A few months later, my friend Mark called me and said, hey, can I hire you to be my coach? I said, sure, what's that? And he said, well, I think if we talked once a week for a half an hour, I'd actually get into gear on this business that I've been talking about at dinner with you over the last year. And I think it would work. He said, and I'll pay you. I said, well, I can cash checks and I can talk on the phone. Let's try the experiment. We did. It was enormously successful. Mark is still in that business today, still a good friend, referred a ton of other people to me. And then my wife said, this is great, but don't you need to get trained? Don't you need some skills? And I said, I guess, but where would you go? And then I heard about Thomas Leonard and Coach U. And Thomas and I met up, and within a few months' time, I was running all the volunteers there. I was coaching Thomas himself. We were growing Coach U. Coach U appeared in Newsweek. And all of a sudden, there was all this attention on coaching because people would read the article and say, hey, John, hey, Sally, they're talking about what you do, but now there's a name for it.
Yeah.
So it was this exciting explosion in people seeing who they were as coaches. And it was a very exciting time to be alive. And for me, it's helped me discover this is the work I was meant to do. This is what I was born to do. My dad was right.
Yeah, I love that. I also have to tell you, it kind of made me giggle when you said your friend is like, maybe we should meet half an hour every week to help keep me kind of moving forward with the things that I say I'm going to do. And you're like, because coaching, what's that? Like, it's usually the opposite way around, right? And so I think it's hilarious that you're like, tell me more about this coaching thing that you want me to do with you. That's awesome. And as you think then about well, and then actually kind of leads to a question, like, what are some of the misconceptions about coaching that you see out there? You work with so many different organizations, you work with so many different leaders within organizations, and also with coaching students. What are those misconceptions?
One of the primary ones, which if you're training to become a coach, is if you don't have a skill to grow and build a business, it's a much harder situation. So you have to learn how to talk to people, how to coach people, and how to learn how to grow a business. It's one thing to get trained. It's another thing to actually be able to deliver it in the world. So I think that's a misconception that newer people joining the profession have. I think more broadly, the word coaching has gotten diluted. You have a lot of former consultants who say, hey, coaches are getting paid more. I'll just now say I'm a coach. And if you meet with them and chat with them, they don't actually have any training. They don't have any certifications, they don't have any skills, but they're good at telling people what to do. And they think that's what coaches do. There's a misconception that athletic coaches are just telling people what to do. And in fact, athletic coaches are some of the best developers of humans on the planet. And that's a big misconception we have. So I spend a lot of time studying athletic coaches and meeting with them and chatting with them. And I don't know if you were athletic when you were young. I wasn't, so I didn't have this experience. But many people will talk about that track coach when they were in middle school or that football coach when they were in high school lives in their head today. Coach Bill told me this, this, and this. Many times it's a second father or a second mother for people who these coaches are. And I love that there's such a developmental role. So I think that's a misconception. And I think the other one is that coaching has to look a certain way. I think the big mistake that people are making today is that people don't care about canonical coaching. Now, you and I are both MCCs. I know you're involved in credentialing. I think credentialing matters. Having standards matters. But I think people over-index on those standards. They over-interpret them, and they use them as a prison rather than beautiful guide rails. And I think they need to be beautiful guide rails because clients don't care. Clients want to get results, and they want to get results quickly. They don't care how you do it. And I think we get mixed up with, but I'm not doing coaching the official way, as opposed to what does my client need? And I think that's another misconception that's worth paying attention to.
And you said a couple of things. I want to go back to the sports coaching. One of the things that I've been really struck with, and probably this occurred, I don't know, early 2010, 2011 timeframe. I can't remember when the Winter Olympics were, so I'm like spitballing here. It was early 2010s somewhere where I was watching the Winter Olympics, and I really liked the downhill skiing and stuff like that. So I was watching a lot of that, and it was fascinating to me because I saw people doing things that, and the work that they were doing with their own work, but also with their coaches, is they were before they even ran a line, they were demonstrating it in their minds, right? Like, so they were practicing it. And I see this much more also now in like football. If you're watching any football or soccer, it doesn't matter what kind of football you're looking at, that after you get off the field, the players are going and they're rewatching their work and they're assessing, and it isn't the coach telling them and yelling at them necessarily. It is much more of a self-reflective process that I've been observing happening in the world of sports that I think really aligns with what you're talking about too, that sports coaches are not just telling people what to do.
Two really interesting things I've discovered about what you're just talking about. One, most talented coaches have an individual development plan for every player on their team. So they know that if this player fumbles, when he comes off the field, he wants to be left alone, or he wants to be loved up, or he wants to be harassed, but they know what each player needs to help them move through that moment and be ready for the next one. And they're very individualistic. So I think that is amazing. The second piece is, imagine if you were an executive and you had all the information that a football player or a coach has to execute your business. Think about this. You've got a whole sideline of people watching the game. So you've got 30 or 40 eyes on the field. You've got 5 or 6 coaches up in the skybox looking down at the field. You've got cameras shooting all the plays, putting them onto those pads that you were talking about so players can reflect on that. What if as an executive you had all of that information just before every meeting or during every meeting, before you went to the next one? All those different points of view, all that different perspective. Imagine what different decisions, different ways you might go. So I think it's a really interesting demonstration of what's available from a perspective point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really illuminating in the sense also of leaders do not lead in silos, right? And so what you're really talking about is how do you resource a leader fully so that they have the most amount of information so that when they're making decisions, they're making them from a place of maybe heightened awareness is too much, but clear awareness of what the different things are. I also just love that coaches have sort of a kind of like, this player likes to be loved up, this player wants you to harass them, this player wants you to leave them alone, which is really meeting the player where they're at versus I'm going to treat every player the same because this is my coaching style and this is how I do it. So kind of gone are the days of the coach who's like, I scream at everybody, and that's just what you get. But rather the coaches themselves are really looking at relational partnership with the players and offering what is important to them. That's fascinating. And so when you're working with a leader, an executive at an organization, how do you start to help them and support them to get this more overarching, I don't know, perspective, like a different perspective on what's happening in their organization and where their decisions are?
I don't have the tools and environment that we do in a football game, and we don't have...
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. You don't?
No. And the football game is 60 minutes, takes 4 hours, but these executives are dealing with life in full days. But what I am encouraging them to do as they grow in an organization is assume that they have less information than they need. So that's a first step that many leaders, as they evolve, they think they still have access to the same amount of information. But oftentimes many senior directors, when they flip up to a C-suite role, forget that many of their information sources cut off because people's relationships with them change. So they have to think through that they now have to grab that information rather than counting on it bubbling up. 2, they have to be far more deliberate and intentional about seeking information and seeking feedback, and then being able to receive it and hear it in a way that people will want to come and do it again and again and again. Those that are able to hear that feedback, put it into good practice, not get defensive, can really thrive, because then people will feel that it's safe to bring them information that they may not want to hear. And the information as a leader you most need to hear is the harder, scary stuff. And if you can have people bring it to you, you've got an unfair advantage.
You know, it's interesting what you're talking about because there's a couple of different things coming up. One, if we were to go back to the coaching, then as a coach, if you're going to be working with leaders and executives and people moving from maybe directors to C-suite, how do you support them in order to have that internal fortitude to hear the things that they maybe don't want to hear, but absolutely are imperative to their capacity to do a good job?
The simplest one is that when we work together, I let them know my style is very direct. I'm going to give you what I see and feel. If it's ever too much, you tell me. And then I say, does that work for you? And they say, yes, please bring it. So we already have an agreement that I'm going to be bringing challenging things. I had a conversation with a leader today. I said, I don't think you're bringing it. I don't think you're bringing it yourself the way you need to be bringing yourself to work, based on just what I heard in the first 5 minutes of this conversation. She said, wow, very timely. And we got into it, and we spent 40 minutes on it. And she talked her way through and got it sorted out. But I let people know I'm going to be really direct because we don't have time. So I've got to be able to say what I see. We'll work through it instead of it dribbling or me. And I don't want it to be a place where people just, oh, David's going to like me. It's all great.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, liking them, sure, but is that helpful to them being successful in what it is that they're doing? Probably not so much. And you had even said to me, I mean, I'm a social worker, so of course I've heard this before because it's an old adage, but you need to, if you feed a person a fish, you feed them for the day. Teach a person to fish, you feed them for their life. And it's really, how do we really teach those? I don't know if teach is the right word, but how do we support people to pull up those parts of themselves so that they can hear what you said to your executive today?
Yeah, but there's an interesting twist on this that I want to take you in a different direction. So yes, we do need to do that. And yes, I'm helping them by our work together, getting good at getting feedback and hearing things that they may not want to hear. So for sure that's happening. And I think, need to do that. As one of the things that I'm seeing, though, as I work with many C-suite leaders, is they need to be developed and they need to figure things out today. So there is a timing issue that we have to sort out, because sometimes they're going to show up with a big problem. We've got to figure it out together. So this is where I'm a bit of advisor, I'm a bit of a teacher, I'm a bit of a coach, I'm a bit of a educator in that moment, because they got to get off the call and go make a call. Now, whatever was underlying that stuckness for them, or whatever development needs were shown up there, I now make a note that in the coming weeks and months, we've got to strengthen that muscle. We've got to build that up. But I've got to help fill the gap today while we build that competence, because sometimes building that confidence or that muscle is it's got time, and the problem they have is urgent today. And I think some coaches miss that.
Well, and I think that adherence, to your earlier point, there's an adherence to these are the competencies. I must adhere to them perfectly, and therefore I can never. I do think there's something about taking on and off the hat that we like. Maybe we just call ourselves hybrid and we just roll with it. But that there are elements where if a person needs an answer like in 40 minutes, then it's probably not going to come with just a lot of really good inquiry, depending on the kind of question that they brought forward and the answer that they need and what's going on. So how do you discern how do you discern though? I mean, I guess that's really a question. How do you discern where you're overstepping that mentoring, teaching, supporting, advising, and they could have figured it out, versus where you really do need to step in as that thought partner for a solution?
My late colleague, David Peterson, had a fabulous story related to this, which is if you walked into a new building and you needed to find the restroom, and you asked somebody, where's the restroom? And they said, well, how badly do you need the restroom? How often have you thought about the restroom? What do you know about finding restrooms? And all those questions that as coaches we've gotten good at asking. In a few minutes, the person would just shake their head and figure it out. And
I'll go find it myself. I really need to go to the bathroom.
Exactly. So part of it is there merit in, is there development and opportunity in getting through this, or do they just need the answers? We can move on to something bigger and meatier. So that's one way to think about it. Two is, what's the urgency? Do we have the time? The third one is, are they ever going to get there? We talk about that people have all the answers within themselves, but I don't know that they have all the technical information within themselves. And there's sometimes you need information to help make a better decision. So I'm never making the decision for the client ever, but I may say, well, what are 2 or 3 things you think you're going to do? And they will say, I don't know, what do you think? And I'll say, well, what's at least one? And then they'll come up with one. I say, okay, what's another? And then I'll say, okay, here's a third and fourth to consider. Let's now compare and contrast all of them. So there's ways to do this that still bring a lot of thinking, bring a lot of creativity, and most importantly, bring a lot of ownership to what the executive ultimately decides to do.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really crucially important too, because I think it depends on who you're working with, for what and why. And this day may determine how we're intersecting versus a different day where they're like, I need to kind of deal with why I'm not feeling confident right now. That's a different conversation. We can take longer. We can go deeper. We can use a more coaching approach. And then another one where, we're on fire here and I need to put the fire out. Where's the extinguisher?
Quick interruption. And I just want to say thank you so much for being on my channel, for liking and subscribing to the work that I'm doing. It means a great deal to me and I'm very appreciative of it. I also want to extend an invitation to my monthly Q&As so that you have an opportunity. If you're a coach, it's my treat. Sign up below or follow the link and you can come each month and have an opportunity to get a resource development CCE, as well as participate in a really rich conversation about how we show up as coaches and what we would like to be playing with in our own work, basically. So you are invited, and thank you for being here.
What do you feel about extinguishers? How important is the extinguisher is not going to be the same sort of usefulness? What are some of the patterns in leadership that you see show up in coaching?
One of the big ones still is we haven't figured out hybrid work and workplaces. We have not figured out how to replace all of that in-person stuff with hybrid stuff. We're getting work done. Things are happening, but there's a lot that's gotten lost. So I spent a fair amount of time talking with people about how are you going to replace some of what was missing there. So that's one. I would say the climate in many of the tech organizations has become very challenging lately. The rules have changed in the last 3 or 4 years. These companies have all gone from grow. How you get advanced is based on scope and how big your team is. And then we just started lopping off lots and lots of people, and we reduced lots of different layers in the organization. And now people say, okay, well, I don't understand how to grow in the organization because it looks like all the opportunities that were in front of me before are gone. So there's a lot of leaders struggling with, how do I know I'm doing a good job? What's my career path? What's my trajectory? Because it's all very different than it was for the 10 or 15 years before. So
yeah, it's really the pre versus post-COVID, the changes. In your mind, well, and I guess it depends on the organization, but in your mind, is there something that leaders need to be thinking about when it comes to the hybrid versus the in-person? Like, what are you seeing working? Or
I don't see leaders thinking hard enough about creating opportunities to connect that aren't scheduled Zoom meetings. And it's that in-between stuff was where more of the magic happens. And if I don't have ways that I can create that, either maybe we're all in person one day a week, or we get my team together from across the country once a month and we hang out for 2 or 3 days. But there's not a lot of deliberate, intentional thinking on how to create some of that lost stuff. And what the problem is if everybody's showing up for meetings as scheduled and work is getting done, it doesn't show up as missing, because these were all opportunistic things. The fact that I ran across you by the copying machine on my way to the bathroom and I noticed you were distressed and had a conversation with you, that's opportunistic. It's not going to happen in a Zoom environment, perhaps. Right. And so I think we just miss things, and I don't know that they've done a very good job thinking about how to recreate those missing moments.
Well, and I don't even know how you would, because you're so right. I mean, it's the whole water cooler conversation about what everybody's watching. So how do you create that within an organization to create those connections of relationship, which are the piece that are then missing? And what Zoom doesn't, I mean, yeah, you can do breakout rooms, but it's not the same thing as those opportunistic moments where we connect with each other and we have real human to human contact.
I purposely work out of a co-working space so that I have humans around. So I have people that I see all the time, that I have conversations with, people I go to lunch with, people I go to coffee with. I like that social aspect to work. It fills me up. Mm-hmm. And for many people, they're thrilled to be home in Zoom and don't want to do that. But I think it makes work a more fulfilling, interesting experience as well.
Yeah. And I mean, you and I had kind of briefly touched on how AI is going to be shifting things for coaches. Before we go there, because I really do want to go there, what are things that you think coaches need to be paying attention to their own work so that when we have the conversation around AI, they're already thinking, like, how might I be able to navigate this if I'm working on what I need to be working on in my own coaching craft?
You and Damien talked about this extensively, and I thought you both had really smart things to say, so I'm not going to repeat those. But I will encapsulate it with the easy stuff is going to get replaced by robots. So if that's all you're good at, you're done. Furthermore, if you're a great coach, are you now working to get the transformation that takes you an hour into 25 minutes? So are you working to speed up your ability to get the results a client needs? So time to result is a huge metric to be paying attention to. And if you aren't challenging yourself to, okay, how could I have done this coaching session in 7 minutes? You aren't pushing hard enough.
Say more about that, because I was almost like thinking, are you suggesting we should be coaching for an hour, but you're suggesting maybe 7 minutes? Talk to me more about this. Okay, you just blew my mind. All right, David, go. Tell me more about this.
In an age, you talked about how ChatGPT is your friend. It helps you prepare all kinds of things like that. Yeah. You're doing that because it's speeding up your ability to get things done. If I have a robotic coach available to me 24 hours a day, that in a blink of a finger, it can give me a lot of information. And as these AI coaches get better and better and better, and they are focused on just getting me an answer, I now have a new standard in terms of time and delivery. So as an example, when Amazon built their Prime program and you could get anything you want, anything you ordered in 2 days for free, it changed the bar for delivery for every other organization you and I might shop for. Mm-hmm. Well, it takes a week and a half from these people. And so if those places to be competitive, they start having to figure out a way to do that. So you now see many, many more places also offer free shipping. So the bar was changed in that way. Similarly, to the point we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, I don't care if my AI coach robot is a canonical coach. I care if it helps me solve my problem. So many people are getting hung up, but this AI coach doesn't coach as well as I do. No, you're right, they don't. But do they solve the problem? Does the client get what they need right away? And AI robots are going to be programmed not to be amazing coaches the way we're being coaches, but to help people get what they need. And I think people get those two things mixed up.
Do you think there's an intersection where like a really good coach also has that kind of, yeah, you're nodding your head. So talk to me about what's showing up.
More and more coaches are now building robots into their suite of offerings. So they will have a robot that is part of that. So you might have Coach David and you might have Robot David and Coach David together. And you have access to Coach David all the time.
Robot David
all the time.
I would love Coach David all the time, but I think he's probably busy.
Yeah. Robot David shares all that data with Coach David. So when Coach David gets on the call with Lyssa and says, I can see that you spoke to the robot about this, this, and this. How's that going? Did you make progress? What else did you need? Did that get you everything you wanted? But now they're using the easy stuff all the time. So they're getting, and then they're saying, okay, there was a theme across all those things. Can we work on that together? So they're saving the harder stuff for you. And we are now selling and building those hybrid models.
Yeah. That is fascinating because I can totally see it. I mean, one of the things that in my past, I mean, we didn't have AI. So when I'm thinking back way before AI. But I mean, instead of teaching every person that I worked with, I would be like, would you go to the bookstore, scan all the books, read some back covers, find the one that you're like, yes, this is the book for me. This is the one that speaks my language for marriage or anger or whatever the heck it was. It didn't matter. They would choose it. I would also probably read it, but then we could have a dialogue where they were bringing their own insights and awarenesses. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I use it, ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever as sort of a search engine anymore also. So I can just go, what are the ingredients of chai tea? Because I just made some chai tea and I needed to know what all the ingredients were because I didn't grow up with a mom who knew how to make chai tea. So it's like, it's taken the place of almost even like search engines. It is a search engine and I don't have to listen to all the advertising that's on there.
Right. So all of the information can now be fed to you. And as you get better and better at prompting, you can say, feed it to me like my mother, feed it to me like an angry postman. I mean, you can go crazy with whatever you want to. Is it perfect yet? No, but information is really there. Where I think the robots are missing out is motivation and deep insight. I don't know that the robot is able to harness its intuition. Not that it has one, like I'm able to harness my intuition.
Right.
But we're getting there because intuition is also really a function of patterns. So those that are great at intuition have amazing pattern databases that they can access very, very, very quickly. Robots are big databases.
So they can go, well, 100 people out of every 101 respond like this. So therefore, yeah, and they can aggregate that information really quickly. It's interesting that you brought up intuition because I think a lot of times people are like, how did you know to say that word or ask that question? And I said, I had sort of a flippant response to it at one point, which was, my intuition told me, it was just sort of a gut instinct. But then as I started to even break down that idea of gut instinct, I mean, even our brain is just an aggregation of information. So I felt something in my stomach. I'm hearing a story. I'm thinking a word that resonates in my perspective of what I'm hearing and the way that my body is feeling. And I come up with, a word that's showing up for me is integrity. And I don't know if that has any bearing here, but as you hear it, anything showing up for you, and it's like, yeah, that's the word. But it's the same thing, that ability as that person, as a vessel, the coach as a vessel to bring forward their intuition. But to your point, AI may get there.
Exactly.
based
Yeah.
on the data.
But that's going to be further out. So specialize in the things that robots can't do and get good at doing them very, very quickly. So people are going to get used to speed. So you can't spend the first couple sessions of a coaching engagement getting to know the client, understanding all their background, all their history. Deliver value in the first 10 minutes of your engagement. Mind-blowing value, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. That's the place, that's the work you need to be doing. And you have to have a very high standard for how much value you are delivering.
Yeah. And how do you see coaches learning to prepare themselves for this new reality as far as the capacity to offer that high value? Because I have a theory. So I'm going to share the theory first, but I really do want to hear your answer to the question, which is it's very difficult to work with somebody around confidence or leadership when you haven't done your own work around your own confidence or your own leadership. Like if I'm scared to have a difficult conversation with you, David, it's going to be really difficult for me to have that coach and hold the space of coaching around having difficult conversations. So, kind of circling back to where I started, how do coaches start to prepare themselves to be able to deliver these really impactful outcomes?
It's a great point. It's something that Dr. Neha Sangwan and I have been talking about a lot lately. One of the things that we are seeing is that many coaches are great at helping other folks and not so great at working on themselves. It's kind of a way to turn the spotlight off, and I'll just take care of you over here. We don't have to worry about what's going on over here. And I've watched coaches kind of resist doing that own work because, I'll just do it over here. It'll be better. And I think in this crazy sped up world that we have right now, you have to be working on yourself in order to be able to stay with your head above water just for what's happening in the world and for your ability to contribute at a much greater level to your clients. So imagine you've got a pool of coaches. 90 of them have poor confidence and 10 of them have amazing confidence. Which one's going to get the more effective result with a client with confidence issues?
I'm going to just throw my hat in the ring here and say the more confident coaches.
Exactly. So I think that's a really, really, really important skill. And I think that people really have to pay more attention to that, particularly because the world is so sped up. Things are so destabilized.
Well, and I mean, I know I was watching you talk about feedback on the EMCC program the end of last year. I think it was the end of last year. And there were a lot of things on that programming through the EMCC around supervision. What's your take on supervision and mentoring for coaches?
I think you want to get every advantage possible to stand out from the crowd. So if you can work with a talented supervisor who can help, who can demonstrate the speed that I'm talking about and help you cut through that speed, the more mentor coaching. Again, remember we talked about our football analogy. Yeah. How many perspectives and other points of view can you bring to the work you're doing to make it better? So, and here's a way to make it really simple for yourself. So I like all those things. Do live coaching demos. It's terrifying, but
I'm doing another one in a few months.
Yeah, do them. They're great. I mean, it's a high wire act, and you've got a lot of people observing and judging you. But you also have people chiming in. How come you asked that question? How come you went that direction? Why'd you do all this? So you can have 1,000 supervisors, depending on the size of the audience. And if you invite that and say, hey, I'm going to do a thing. I don't know if it's going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to try a bunch of stuff. I'd love all the feedback about what you liked, didn't like, hated. abhorred all the way through, and let's talk about it. And imagine doing that for a half hour, 45 minutes, and then throwing the room open and having people talk about that, where you're not showing up to say, look how great David Goldsmith is, or look how amazing Lyssa deHart is, but look what a learner Lyssa is. Look what she's trying to figure out. So if you can bring that energy to what you're doing, I think that's where people are going to grow and be amazing.
I think that is so important. And I think it's that mindset. I mean, I guess if we look at the competencies, it's the coaching mindset, right? It's that I don't have to be perfect, but going back to your feedback conversation that you were having, how do I encourage the feedback? I don't have to take 100% of the feedback I'm given. I can suss out the parts I can hear that I'm ready for, but I don't have to be afraid of it. I can invite it. And to your point, then I've got 100 supervisors giving me feedback, and I go through and I'm like, that one really resonates with me, and that one really doesn't. So kind of Control Alt Delete there, but on these pieces, these are places for me to really play with and grow.
I'll tell something about myself that many people don't know, but I can be very thin-skinned. So I can be quite offended easily, particularly in my personal relationships. But one of the things that I loved about my relationship with, again, David Peterson, was we agreed at the very beginning, we're here to make each other better. And we're going to give straight and direct feedback after everything we deliver together, and so that we can make each other better. So we never held back. And so whatever he had to say, I knew it was in the spirit of me being better and us being better. And we'd invite other people to those sessions with us, and they'd be a little blown away because they would see us talking so directly to each other. Like, you asked too many yes/no questions in that coaching demo. I don't understand why you did this. I thought your tone was off here. You seemed distracted. But it blurred the norms of what we think is respectful dialogue between two leaders in public. But we were purposely demonstrating you can be direct and straight in the service of invited feedback to be better.
And I think that is crucial, because I know for myself, one of the dances that I walk a fine line with is how much feedback to give, because there are a number of people in the world that are thin-skinned. And it is very easy to have them completely shut down because you're not saying your coaching was perfect. And honestly, anything short of your coaching was perfect is like, kind of scary to people. And so again, I mean, I think this kind of goes back to the thing that you were saying earlier too, which is, how do we become strong enough and courageous enough to invite the feedback, like the leader or like the, quarterback or whoever it is that is getting the feedback, and how do we start to really allow for it? But you said something else that was really important. And it's so funny because I was with a group of friends yesterday and I brought this idea to them as just a friendship circle that we're in, about setting agreements on how we will be with each other. And to one of them, no matter what is said, the intention, right? The intention is positive. It may not land that way, but my intention is positive. So how will we be with each other when we're giving feedback or when we disagree on something? And I don't think enough organizations or even coaches or anybody really, I mean, I'm married to somebody, have been for a very long time. We have agreements on how we will be with each other when we are having a disagreement, because as long as we're in agreement, it's hunky-dory, super easy to deal with. It's as soon as there's a disturbance in the matrix, and we have to deal with something more difficult, that we fall back on our agreements on how we're going to have this conversation now, and how we're going to treat each other, and how we're going to be. And I may not be able to hear all the hard feedback immediately. I may say, like, I need a few minutes to process this. Like, can we get it together tomorrow? But we don't just let it go away and pretend like it doesn't exist either. I don't know.
Yeah, I think to encapsulate this, to get to your primary question, if you want to survive in the age of robots, you have to be working on yourself at multiple levels to really fine-tune your own abilities, your own learning, your own information, your own knowledge, your own expertise. There's a bunch of stuff you got to be working on. You've got to be able to do it better, and you've got to get the feedback systems, the perspective systems on your own work, and do it in an unvarnished way and invite as much information as you can in. Back to our football analogy. The team that lost one of the games yesterday in the NFL divisional rounds, and I know this is going to come out months later, they're done for the season, but they're going to go and watch the film from that game this week. What did we learn? What did we miss? Where did we screw up? And they're going to spend hours going through that. The team that won is going to go through and say, okay, where did we miss? What did we do well? What did we screw up? And they're going to say, we screwed up a lot of stuff and we won.
Right.
How are we going to use all that information to prepare for the next game? And they'll do that as a team. They'll do that in divisional groups. They'll spend a lot of time, and they'll watch a particular play 10, 15, 20, 30 times over and over again to glean what they learned, what they missed. And if coaches did a tenth of what a football team does in terms of reviewing what they did, imagine how much better they would get.
Imagine how much better they would get. And I've been a big advocate for like Ray notes and getting transcript analysis done and doing that work yourself, and not just having the AI figure it out for you, but really looking at what was offered, what your question was, because I just think it's crucial to this biofeedback loop that we're talking about here, where we had an experience and now we're assessing it, and then we can start to think about choice points. And to your point, they're going to look over the same play multiple times so they can glean every last drop of learning out of it. And you've got to thicken your skin if you're going to be able to do that, because you can't let it bother you that you made a mistake. And I do think it is sort of interesting, like the difference between the mistakes that were made in the game that you're talking about. My guess is they were insignificant in the sense that they both made mistakes. It's just one made a slightly more.
Yep.
Right. And it was enough to throw the game into a different direction. Yeah. Brilliant.
What's interesting is most of our clients have no idea what good coaching is. They've got someone who's listening, asking good questions, and they're getting insights and moving forward. So our clients aren't necessarily great judges of what great coaching is. Their bar is fairly low. So that also lures people into doing the same kind of thing. It seems to be working. People keep coming back. I guess I'm okay. I don't think it's enough to get them to survive over the next 3 to 5 years. I think you have to really push the bar.
Well, and I mean, coaching is unregulated, and I have lots of thinking around that, but let's just go with coaching is unregulated. And as a result of that, we have, to your point earlier, a dilution of the industry, with everybody calling themselves a coach, even though they're really probably more mentors or advisors or whatever, consultants, whatever they are, educators. What is your thinking then about what happens for people who are just kind of sliding by as coaches? Are they just going to go away, or is there enough of a need still for people to be told what to do that's going to continue to be of use to people? I mean, I'm not even sure.
I think they're going to go away or have to do something else.
So it'll sort of like they'll winnow out as.
Yeah. I mean, robots will get perfectly good at telling people what to do as well. So consultants are going to get replaced by robots even more quickly than coaches are to some extent.
Yeah.
But your ability to put 1 and 2 together and come up with 7 and create an insight and motivation to work on something that's hard and have somebody get through something very difficult and be able to knit it together well, that's the real interesting transformative work. So if you can do that, people will continue paying for that. If you can do something that the robot can do very easily, yeah, people aren't going to want to pay for that. So, and what's interesting is the trend is that we believe that PCC level coaching in a couple of years' time will be doable by a robot. So ACC and PCC level coaching, a lot of the companies that are providing coaching in bulk to organizations for managers and lower level people are currently using a lot of those ACC and PCC level coaches who are not good at building a practice and who just want a lot of clients fed to them. And they're getting paid $20, $30, $40, $50 an hour. Now, that's not a bad living. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the same money that other coaches are making. But that's the work that's going to be more easily replaced. And those companies that are busy employing people at that level to do a lot of that low-level work are also busy developing robots to develop that work. Just like Uber is busy developing self-driving cars, so they don't have drivers in the mix.
Yeah. My husband flies into Phoenix usually once a month. Sorry, my dogs are walking out the dog door right this second. My husband works in Phoenix, and once a month he's like flying in there, and they've got driverless cars already there that drive him to wherever it is that he's going. So, I mean, they're there already being used in big metropolitan areas where you don't need an Uber driver. You can just get into whatever the name of the driverless Uber is. It's not through Uber, it's through another organization. I can't remember what it is exactly. But I mean, that's the only thing he takes anymore. Just it's so easy.
Yeah.
So getting used to being in a driverless car is probably going to be the harder thing, because pretty much everybody freaked out when I put the video on, Facebook. Going back to this idea of feedback, and not just for coaches, but also within organizations, why do you think so many organizations struggle with this idea of how to create a healthy feedback culture?
I think the biggest thing that people miss is timing. So they start out with, we should all be able to give feedback to each other whenever possible. We want to be direct and open and honest with you. And I think everybody at a core level agrees that's probably a good idea. But they don't then do enough training and caveats to make that work. So what I see too frequently is I, as a manager or a coworker or somebody else in the organization, decide that you need feedback, Lyssa. I don't say, is this a good time for me to do that? I don't say, are you interested?
How will we be with each other?
Yeah. They sometimes just say, I've got feedback for you. And there's this expectation that I should be ready. And many times you're not. And sometimes people would like to be able to say, gosh, I'm jammed doing this, or I'm freaking out about this, or whatever else. I'd love to hear it. Can we make time tomorrow to do that? Or people say, is this a good time to give you feedback? No. Mm-hmm. Because often, too frequently, when someone comes to you and says, Lyssa, I have some feedback for you.
No, I don't want to talk right now.
Exactly. But you don't necessarily think the feedback is going to be, gosh, Lyssa, the podcast you did last week was so amazing. The questions were so insightful. Your hair was perfect. The dialogue was amazing. The setting was great. An unbelievable selection of hosts. That's not usually what they mean by feedback.
That's a really good point. Our assumption is it's going to be bad.
Exactly.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, then part of the way that we create healthy feedback cultures is we don't just give negative feedback. We give positive feedback too.
Yeah. if you're coming to me regularly and it's always with what I've done wrong, I'm going to walk the other direction when you're coming, unless I'm so excited to hear your feedback because it's been so constructive and so instrumental in helping me grow as a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's really crucial. I mean, and this is honestly, it's kind of funny because in marriage counseling, one of the things I would talk with people about is, look, if every startup to every conversation is we need to talk, it gets really loaded that there's a problem and now we're going to have to discuss it, so that when you call, people are like, busy right now, I'll talk to you later. Like people don't, they get tired and exhausted. And Gottman, and if people don't know John Gottman's work, I'm going to put a big plug for it right now, but he talks a lot about the imbalance towards the positive and the 5-to-1 imbalance towards the positive. And it's sort of like for every one aw shucks you have to give, you need like 5 attaboys, or it needs to be imbalanced. And he talked about, I remember I trained with him back in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was doing a lot of their trainings. And one of the things that he talked about a lot was, even if you have a really like contentious or volatile relationship, if it's imbalanced towards the positive, it can still work. So it doesn't mean everybody has to just go around being Pollyanna nice to each other, but that there is the imbalance towards the positive. And I think this is key for feedback. I think this is key for leaders and organizations, but I think that at least that's what I think I hear you talking about.
For sure. Yeah, if you can change up the contracting and the timing, it goes way better. I mean, it's a huge resource. So organizations are right to say we should be able to have an environment where we can share openly and directly with each other, but they have to understand some of the human parts that go with it, because humans are not robots.
Right. We've covered a lot of ground here today. Do you have any like people or resources or books that you think are really important that people might put on their book list to read that would support them in whether it's being a better coach or a better leader? Like any books really kind of rising to the surface for you, or people to listen to?
Nothing's coming to mind, but I'm glad you brought up Dr. Gottman. I think his work is fabulous. I've read many of his books, and I think it's a good example of where, as a coach, I like to veer outside of coaching books per se, and I like to understand humans. And I think the Gottman work helps you understand humans and relationships. One of the things that is true for me in my coaching is when I'm working with leaders, I am working on their business. And almost always, I am also working on their life. And inevitably, there are lessons from their relationships personally that are showing up in their work relationships. And sometimes it's easier to practice them at work or personally to migrate the other direction. So I think understanding human behavior at its core is going to be so important if you want to stay ahead of the robots. So that would be my broader recommendation.
Yeah, I'm going to second that. I'm trying to think. I think understanding the dynamics of relationship is fundamental. And to your point, I just want to illustrate or just highlight your point, which is sometimes it's easier to work on some of these things at work where you maybe don't have the same level of emotional attachment to an outcome, and then translate it home if you're having struggles at home. But on the other hand, it may be easier to work on it at home depending on the dynamics, and then translate it into the work environment. And I think there's probably multiple places where you may be doing this sort of dance of, I'm trying this out at home, I'm doing this at work, and then I'm migrating them into the opposite directions. And I think if we are thoughtful and curate opportunities for ourselves to do the learning that have the lowest risk, we have the highest chance of being more successful as we practice it over time. But I think that's the other piece. I don't know about you, but for me, it's a daily practice for me to show up fully, to be courageous, to be willing to put myself out there, to not just lose my mind over something ridiculous and silly or whatever. Like, these are just sort of daily practices also. And the more we practice them, the easier they get through time. I've just had a lot of time to practice them because I'm super old,
exactly.
So one of the things that I always do at the end of each podcast is I have a question that was asked by a prior guest. And the question that's showing up for you is, hold on, let me get to it. I thought I had it right in front of me, and I do, but it's in tiny type. So hold on one second while I get to it a little bigger. What is one childhood experience that shaped who you are today?
I discovered when I was young that I was comfortable speaking in front of the public more so than other people. So I remember being at sailing camp at 8 years old, and we had the annual awards banquet for our counselors. And somebody had to get up and give the awards, and I was able to do it. And so I've built on that and said, okay, I have some confidence here. I'm not afraid here. I'm ready to go here. And I can see that stepping in, saying yes, was a very helpful, valuable way to practice and grow. So that's my childhood memory that popped up as you asked that question.
I love that. And I think that ultimately also is probably why you are the business person and the entrepreneur that you are, is that you put your hand up and you say yes when people ask you to do stuff, and you don't let it stop you just because you're like, I don't have 20 years experience doing that. Your confidence, you're like, I'll figure this out. I'm smart enough to figure this out, and I have my integrity to do a good job, and etc. David, thank you so much for being in the studio today. I have so enjoyed the conversation.
It's been a treat. It's been a delight. The time's flown by. I've really enjoyed spending this time with you, and looking forward to more.
Yay.